following the news closely, and that we wait with bated breath for the return of the hostages and the end of this brutal war. I know that we are praying that the ceasefire holds and that Sunday is a day of peace in the region, and that peace can come and flourish in the region. We've been hoping and praying, and for some of us agitating for this diplomatic breakthrough, and it feels like we're on the precipice of it, and it almost feels like celebrating it can be jinxing it, and yet here we are praying that it be true. Now that we're in this moment on the precipice of peace, I want to take a step back and think through how this moment fits into Jewish time and the broader sweep of Jewish wisdom. This week we begin to read the book of Exodus. We're in Parshat Shemot, and I think this Parsha offers an excellent message for us this time of year. The Parsha begins sort of with a transition from Genesis to Exodus. We hear the Parsha gets its name Shemot, which means names, because it begins by saying the names of the Israelites who are in Egypt. And gradually those Israelites begin to multiply and grow. The Hebrew is that they paru veyitzritzu. They flourish and grow in the land. And this paru veyitzritzu, this language, is reminiscent of the language of Genesis. So it is almost as if God's vision is being fulfilled, and we have arrived at this beautiful place, and now we can multiply and prosper. So things seem to be going great, and of course, you know what happens next. The turbulence of history sets in. The text tells us that a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. This reminds us that history and our fates can change on a dime. This new king feels threatened by this huge population of Jews or Israelites, and eventually he says, if we are attacked, the Israelites might rise up and join our attackers. So he orders the killing of all male babies of the Israelites. It's a horrible thing, and it is another reminder of how history can turn against us. So here we are with this order that all the babies of the Israelites be killed, and here's where the hope comes in. There's two Hebrew midwives named Shifra and Puah who save the baby boys. They refuse to kill the baby boys, and what they do is clever. Pharaoh asks them, what's going on here? Why aren't you fulfilling my order and killing these baby boys? And these midwives, Shifra and Puah, say, the babies are born so quickly, we can't arrive in time to do the deed. The Israelite women are so fertile and prolific that we can't arrive in time to do the deed. So the numbers continue to increase, and the size of the Israelite population continues to grow, and finally Pharaoh gets frustrated and orders that every baby boy be thrown into the Nile, and he orders the population, the general population, to do that. You all know the rest of the story. This leads to slavery in Egypt for 400 years, and eventually there's the plagues, which we know so well from the Passover Seder, and the escape from Egypt, Sinai, the true story of Moses at Half Dome, and finally we enter the Promised Land. I think it's worth meditating, though, on this moment we're in, and at least in the beginning of the Parsha with Shifra and Puah. The Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt famously wrote about how nativity, birth, is cause for hope and optimism. She writes that new life brings us new hope and reason for optimism about the future. I know that we, in the past year and a half, we as a collective people, have also felt subject to the whims of history. We're not in Egypt. There's not a new pharaoh who does not know us, and yet we feel taken by history, and we feel how history can indeed turn on us on a dime. It's been difficult to find hope since October 7th. Of course, there was the brutality of that day, which I certainly, and I know many of us, still find very difficult to think about. And our hearts have been aching for the past 469 days as we pray for the return of the hostages and the welfare of people in Gaza and the region. It's been difficult to watch the news, and it's been difficult to make sense of what's happening. And yet, our Parsha this week offers us hope. Hope in a new future, hope in a new generation perhaps. Our tradition tells us, and we read each year this story of hope in a better way. Yes, things are not always smooth, and maybe that's precisely the reason we return to this story year after year. There's an interesting word that is repeated in Shemot, in this Parsha. The word is yarad, which means to go down. And Gunther Plaut points out that the idea is that God, yarad, God goes down and intervenes in history. Now, that is an idea that I think in 2025 can be viewed negatively. I at least don't think I believe in a God who can come down with a heavy hand and intervene in history. And yet, I think there's something powerful about that, and powerful about what's going on in the book of Exodus when we encounter this rivalry between the God of Pharaoh and the God of the Israelites. The God of Pharaoh, the God who we read about and learn about at the burning bush in this Parsha, is ultimately a God of morality, a God of justice, a God who cares about what is right and what is wrong. And so I read this book of Exodus and the story of God Yarad, God coming down. I read that as saying that justice, the God of justice, will ultimately triumph over the God of Pharaoh, the God of raw power, and the God that does not follow morality. Our God, the God of the burning bush, is a God who cares about justice. Ultimately, as we read this Torah every year, as we live in the difficult whims of history, and yet we are asked to believe in the God of justice. We are asked to believe in hope. We are asked to believe in new generations. And we are asked to believe that Adonai, the God of justice, will prevail. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.